Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a really thought-provoking exploration. We're looking into the contrasting worldviews of two, well, intellectual titans,
Mhm.
Adam Smith and Karl Marx.
Yeah, and specifically focusing on something pretty central to, human experience, love.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
often talk about them with economics, politics,
Sure.
but maybe overlook their ideas about human connection, about
Yeah.
sentiment.
Right. So this deep dive, the aim is really to uncover their fundamental differences in how they saw love, how they valued it. We're drawing from Smith's big works, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, The Wealth of Nations, plus some modern takes,
Mhm.
and then contrasting that with Marx, his economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, his whole theory of human nature.
Okay, so our mission, let's say, is to cut through the complexity a bit, extract the core distinctions in how they viewed love, even where, Marx's view isn't maybe super explicit.
Guy is more inferred.
Exactly. And see what these differences tell us about their bigger philosophies. You might find some surprising insights, actually.
Definitely. So let's kick things off with Adam Smith. A really foundational concept for understanding his view on relationships is sympathy, right? From the theory of moral sentiments. What does that actually involve?
Okay, right. So for Smith, sympathy isn't quite just feeling sorry for someone. It's more basic, like a human ability to imagine ourselves in someone else's situation.
Okay.
And because of that, we sort of experience similar feelings. There's a great line I saw. Basically, Smith believed realizing something makes others miserable makes us miserable.
Ah,
And
right.
if something makes them happy, we feel happy too. It's this imaginative leap, really, stepping into their shoes. That's the basis for caring about others.
And this capacity, this sympathy, it really affects how we connect then, according to Smith.
Oh, absolutely. The idea of mutual sympathy comes up a lot. He apparently said something like, "Nothing pleases us more than to observe in other men a fellow feeling with all the emotions of our own breast."
Huh. A shared sense.
Yeah, exactly, that mutual understanding. It sort of enlivens joy and alleviates grief. Now, building on that, Smith saw love itself as an agreeable passion, something that, brings contentment. It doesn't necessarily need everyone else to approve. How's that different from, say, less pleasant feelings?
Yeah, that's a really key distinction he makes. Smith argued that the disagreeable passions, things like resentment, they have a much stronger need for that external validation, that consolation of sympathy to make them feel better.
Okay.
So love, for him, it's kind of a more self-contained, positive feeling. It's nurtured by our innate ability to sympathize. But how does that square with the Smith everyone thinks they know, the self-interest guy?
Right, that's crucial. It's a huge misunderstanding, really, that Smith thought humans were only driven by self-interest.
Okay.
Actually, the theory of moral sentiment spends, like, hundreds of pages denying that very idea.
Yeah.
And even Wealth of Nations sort of denies it, too.
Huh.
Now, he definitely recognized self-interest is powerful, especially in economics, the famous butcher, brewer, baker example.
Yeah, providing our dinner out of their own interest.
Exactly. But the broader context is so important.
And what is that vital context?
Well, Smith himself pointed out that in civilized society, we always need cooperation, assistance from tons of people. But our whole life is barely enough time to make just a few real friends.
Mm.
So while, yeah, we rely on the self-interest of strangers in the market,
Right.
Smith totally understood our basic need for cooperation. And that can't just depend on everyone being nice all the time.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like Smith is saying, okay, self-interest drives the market with strangers, but our closer connections, they need something more.
Precisely. And that something more includes benevolence, care, maybe even love. Smith said, basically, every person is first recommended to their own care. We're naturally best equipped to look after ourselves.
Okay.
Following that, our warmest affections naturally go to our family. Then that circle widens a bit. Friends, neighbors, colleagues. But, as Smith saw it, the force of benevolence gets weaker the further out you go.
Right, the more remote the connection.
Yeah, more casual. He even noted that towards, say, foreigners or groups we see as rivals, you might not just find a lack of benevolence, but actual malevolence.
It's a pretty realistic take on affection, acknowledging its boundaries. And he contrasted his view with his teacher, Hutcheson, didn't he? Hutcheson thought virtue was all about benevolence.
Right. Smith thought that was, well, a bit extreme. He argued that looking out for our own happiness and interest, that can actually be very laudable sometimes.
How so?
Well, qualities like economy, industry, discretion, they're often driven by self-interest. Right. But Smith thought there's still Very praiseworthy.
Okay. Now, I saw a distinction mentioned in one of the articles that seems helpful here. The difference between love-based sociality and interest-based sociality. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. So, love-based sociality, think friendships, romance that comes from mutual sympathy, that shared feeling we talked about.
Okay, the emotional connection.
Exactly. Interest-based sociality, on the other hand, is more about practical benefits. It can include altruism, sure, but it doesn't necessarily spring from that deep mutual emotional bond.
So like the difference between.
Yeah, like the joy you feel sharing good news with a really close friend that's love-based, rooted in shared feeling, versus, say, the satisfaction of a fair deal with a shopkeeper. That's interest-based, focused on mutual benefit, but not necessarily deep feeling.
Got it. That clarifies things. So where do markets fit into this picture for Smith?
Well, Smith seemed to believe that markets kind of economize on love. Because love, or deep benevolence, is pretty scarce, right? You can't rely on it for everything.
Mm.
So economic interactions, especially with strangers, they mainly rely on self-interest, which might not feel warm and fuzzy, but it's a more dependable foundation for large-scale exchange than hoping everyone feels benevolent towards everyone else.
Okay, so that paints a pretty clear picture for Smith. Love, benevolence, they're natural, but they have their sphere, mostly personal.
Yeah.
Now, let's pivot to Karl Marx. The material we looked at doesn't give us a direct definition of love from him.
Right.
So how does his understanding of human connections stack up, especially against Smith?
This is where things really diverge, yeah. Marx's big focus, particularly in his early writings like the 1844 manuscripts, is on alienation under capitalism.
Okay.
There are basically four types he talks about. Alienation from the product you make, from the act of working itself, from our species being, and crucially for this discussion, from other human beings.
Let's zoom in on that alienation from species being. What did Marx actually mean by that, and how does it relate to connection and, well, maybe love?
Okay, so for Marx, our core human nature, his species being idea, is fundamentally social. We're meant to be creative through our work. Unlike animals who just act out of immediate need, humans, ideally, should act consciously, not just for themselves, but for their community, their species. Work is what makes us human, in a way. But under capitalism, Marx argued, labor just becomes a means to survive. It's forced, it's external.
Not fulfilling.
Exactly. The worker finds no purpose, no pleasure, or fulfillment. And this disconnects us from a core part of our humanity, that social creative potential.
And how does being alienated from that affect our relationships with each other, leading to that fourth kind, alienation from other people?
Well, that's the direct link.
Yeah.
In a system built on private property and exchange, Marx argued, individuals inevitably start seeing each other mainly as, well, as tools, as means to achieve their own personal goals.
Right.
One analysis put it like this. Under the environments of private ownership and exchange, the individual is alienated from his species being and his fellows, whom he considers solely as a means. This focus on individual gain, driven by the economy, it fundamentally gets in the way of genuine social connections, that broader communal feeling, which you might associate with love in a wider sense.
So creates antagonism.
Yeah, Marx saw the individual under capitalism as estranged from their basic nature, leading to antagonistic ties in society. Not exactly fertile ground for widespread love and connection.
So, okay, where Smith sees self-interest working in the market but kind of balanced by natural sympathy in personal life, Marx sees the economic system itself as actively damaging our ability to form real human bonds.
Precisely. Smith thought, a decent society could emerge through freedom, justice, letting moral and economic coordination happen without some central controller messing with human nature too much.
Right.
Marx, though, saw capitalism as inherently flawed, creating these systemic roadblocks to authentic connection, to fulfillment. He believed you needed a fundamental change, a transformation of society, to overcome alienation and allow for real human flourishing.
Which presumably includes more genuine relationships.
Exactly. That seems to be the strong implication. More unalienated, more communal ways of relating.
It's really striking how differently they view the economy's role in shaping us, isn't it? For Smith, it's sort of a practical sphere where self-interest works.
While for Marx, it deeply influences, even distorts, our fundamental connections.
Yeah. And Smith could see some uses, even socially useful purposes, for traits like self-love or vanity.
Right, like driving industry.
Whereas Marx really saw the capitalist system itself as the source of the problems, the alienation that blocks genuine connection, including, authentic love and social bonds.
Okay, so let's try and really nail down the core difference on love then. Would it be fair to say Smith sees love and benevolence as natural human feelings
Hmm.
that operate maybe more strongly in our personal lives, even within a society driven by markets.
Yeah, I think that captures Smith's view well, natural sentiments with a certain scope.
And Marx, well, he doesn't define love explicitly, but his whole critique is about how capitalism fundamentally alienates us from our social nature from each other.
Thereby getting in the way, hindering the development of those deeper, authentic connections we might call love or communal bonds.
Exactly. Smith is sort of working within the system, seeing how feelings and economics interact. Marx is challenging the whole foundation, arguing it warps our humanity and our ability to truly connect.
Understanding that contrast really does offer a valuable insight, doesn't it, into the core beliefs of these two, well, hugely influential thinkers.
Yeah. Smith sees a world where love, okay, maybe it's not driving everything in society, but it still has a crucial place in relationships, in holding things together.
While Marx envisions a system that actively eats away at our ability to connect genuinely, suggesting that true fulfillment, including real relationships, needs a radical change.
So something for you, the listener, to
Yeah.
think about. How might the economic system we live in now be shaping the way we experience love, connection? Does Smith's view of, say, natural but limited benevolence feel more true to your experience?
Or does Marx's critique of systemic alienation resonate more? What happens when we prioritize individual gain versus, say, communal well-being? How does that play out in our relationships?
It definitely gives you something to chew on.
It really does. It raises fundamental questions about the kind of society we're building and whether our economic structures help or hinder meaningful human connection.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until our next exploration, keep thinking.